I've got to say I have a lot of respect for Francis Collins. He has, uh, made quite an advance, I think, in the scientific arena. But also, he has taken a lot of flack uh, for his faith amongst his fellow scientists that don't happen to share his beliefs about God and Christianity. Um, So I think he really has done a good job of standing firm in his convictions and articulating why he believes what he believes. And in the language of God, which I just finished reading, he really sets forth a pretty good case um, for the existence of God, and he doesn't really get into um, Jesus so much. He does touch on it towards the end, and say that there's a good historical case that there was a Jesus, and he the what we read about him in the Bible is trustworthy history, and so on and so forth, and that kind of sets off Christianity as a more specific uh, view that is respectable than merely just believing that there is a God, which is what most of the book seems to focus on. But there is one thing in here um, that I find particularly uh, there is one thing in here that I do have to disagree with very loudly and make a video or two about. That is his chapter on intelligent design. So he says here on page 189, the human blood clotting cascade, appearing with its dozen or more proteins to be a complex system that Behe deems worthy of Rube Goldberg, can in fact be understood as the gradual recruitment of more and more elements of the cascade. The system appears to have begun with a very simple mechanism that would work satisfactorily for a low pressure, low flow hemodynamic system, and to have evolved over a long period of time into the complicated system necessary for humans and other mammals that have a high pressure cardiovascular system where leaks must be quickly stopped. Important feature, let's see. Uh, Skipping down a bit. Admittedly, we cannot precisely outline the order of the steps that ultimately led to the human clotting cascade. We may never be able to do so, because the host organisms of many predecessor cascades are lost to history. Yet Darwinism predicts that plausible intermediate steps must have existed, and some have indeed already been found. ID is silent on such predictions, and ID's central premise, that the entire blood clotting cascade had to emerge fully functional from prior DNA gibberish, sets forth a straw man scenario that no serious student of biology would accept. Now, what Collins is doing here is explaining why, before I started in the book, before getting to the chapter on intelligent ID, he talks about atheistic evolution. He talks about creationism. Now he's talking about ID. I do like the fact that he distinguishes ID from creationism. But he's saying that all of these approaches to a synthesis of science and faith fail, and what we should adopt is theistic evolution, or what he calls biologos. So he's explaining here why the ID movement is not the way to go. And the number one example of irreducible complexity uh, propounded by Michael Behe after the bacterial flagellum is the human blood clotting cascade. So if that can be shown scientifically to not be irreducibly complex, then that would be a refutation of ID theory. Well, the problem that Collins, and it's kind of ironic that he calls this a alleged claim of ID proponents as a straw man, is that this claim on the part of Collins is itself a straw man. In other words, has misunderstood what ID is and is not saying. Uh, so, and I think at one point he even defines ID um, in an accurate way, but then goes on and argues against it by himself setting up a straw man. So, for example, it's the part where he says that the blood clotting cascade has evolved over a long period of time into the complicated system necessary for humans and other mammals who have a high pressure cardiovascular system. So the blood clotting cascade in humans is more complex, Collins admits, than it is in more simple non-mammalian animals. Well, I think that's kind of what Behe was trying to say. Behe does not dispute the fact that you could have a different system with a different function. What he is saying is that an irreducibly complex system cannot have the same function by losing any of its parts. And Collins appears to admit that in the case of animals that are not mammals, they have a simplified version of the cascading system, but it does not function. It would not function appropriately in mammals because mammals have the higher blood pressure. Let's see. Yeah, they have a higher pressure cardiovascular system. So it's the function of stopping this high pressure, this higher blood pressure, so that the mammals don't bleed to death. That function is not present in the non-mammalian cascading systems. Okay, now at the end of that quote that I just read to you, he's got a reference to Ken Miller. He says, along with Ken Miller, that the bacterial, well, no, not the bacterial flagellum, but talking about the cascading blood clotting system. He says that ID is silent in such predictions, and ID's central premise that the entire blood clotting cascade had to emerge fully functional from prior DNA gibberish sets forth the straw man scenario no serious student of biology would accept. Then there's a quote to Ken Miller. Well, Ken Miller, also a theistic evolutionist, has himself, it seems to me, badly misunderstood or misrepresented ID. But more about that in a minute. Now, I don't think that Behe has said that it emerged fully functional from prior DNA gibberish. Rather, what Behe has said, as I understand it, is that there was perfectly legitimate DNA that coded for some type of biological system, which was then changed by an intelligent designer's intervention to be more complex, so that the higher blood pressure will we'll still get scabbing even though the blood pressure is higher before we bleed to death, we mammals. So yeah, it's a misrepresentation of ID. Then Collins writes, the eye is another example frequently cited by advocates of intelligent design as displaying a degree of complexity that stepwise natural selection could never have achieved. And notice he doesn't say that Behe said that. He says that ID proponents. I don't remember where but there was some kind of debate or something that Behe was in, and he explicitly said, no, we do have a Darwinian pathway, it's in the scientific literature, for the evolution of the eye. So the eye, according to Behe, is not irreducibly complex. Uh, so if we are to take this as to be that that's what ID says, that's not what ID says. ID proponents like Behe, who are up on the scientific literature, will admit that the eye is not irreducibly complex. Okay, now let's see here. And he admits, Collins admits that they don't have a step-by-step process to get to the mammalian human blood clotting cascade. Okay, he talks quite a bit about the eye. Then he says that the design of the eye does not appear on close inspection to be completely ideal. And then similar imperfections in the human spine, not in parentheses, not optimally designed for vertical support. And then wisdom teeth and curious persistence of the human appendix also seem to be unexplicable by ID, by human anatomists, because they're less than optimal. Well, the human spine, he qualifies that. He says it's not optimally designed for vertical support. Well, human beings are not strictly vertical animals. Infants have to learn to crawl before they learn to walk. Human beings bend over a lot to lift things. We sit at a computer desk, some of us, in our workforces, in our jobs, so that is not standing up erect, that's sitting down. We sleep lying down. The human spine is very versatile, so it may not be ideal for vertical support, because if it was ideal for vertical support, it wouldn't be ideal for these other situations. So overall, we could say that it is a good design. And I think we could say similar things about the eye as well, the human eye. Perhaps we don't even know what the uh, overall idealness of the eye is. Uh, but there is some advantage, presumably, of having the eyes just as they are in human beings, that they would not have if they were quote-unquote designed better. Um, and then he talks about the bacterial flagellum. I really need to go into that in detail, so I'm almost out of time. I'll have to make this a two-part video. Thank you.